Good morning, and welcome to this event and our discussion on should states take on immigration. My name is Andres Martinez. I'm with the New America Foundation, an independent think tank in town that's one of the two co-sponsors of this event. Thank you all for making it. I was reflecting this morning on the way over here about the debate that we've had in this country in the last decade over immigration, much of which I lived as a journalist. And 5 years ago at the LA Times, in the heat of a lot of the debates about immigration reform at the federal level, on the editorial page, to summarize what I felt were the contradictions in our approach to immigration, one day we published, instead of a written editorial, just a cartoon that said U.S. immigration policy, and we portrayed the fence along the border, and it had alternating signs, one of which read, "Do not trespass." The next one, "Help wanted, inquire within." And I felt that that sort of summed up a lot of our contradictions as a society in terms of how we addressed immigration. And it's a little bit dispiriting that 5 years on, we haven't resolved these tensions in our immigration policy. And so it's not surprising that with this impasse at the federal level, and I think regardless of one's views on immigration and what the right outcome is, we should share the frustration that we haven't resolved the contradictions. So here we are 5 years on, discussing state immigration policies, which isn't surprising given the impasse at the federal level. And I think this morning's program will be very educational in terms of really digging deep into the diversity of activities that are happening at various states on immigration policy in the absence of federal coherence. So this is, I think, a timely event, both in terms of the politics of the issue, the legal issues that have arisen at the Supreme Court, and that will continue to be litigated. And so I welcome all of you for joining us. I do also want to pass things along now to Tamar Jacoby, who has long been a fierce intellectual leader on the issue of immigration policy, and I have always learned a lot from her. And I'm thrilled that New America and Immigration Works have come together to put this event together, and I just want to pass the baton now to Tamar. She is the president of Immigration Works.
Well, thank you so much, Andres. Thank you for the New America Foundation for co-sponsoring this event with us, and thank you all for being here. Welcome. I'm just going to give a few words of context and background and kind of what we're hoping to do today, and then move with dispatch to our first panel. So I just want to put this in a little bit of context. Andres helped you laid out the big picture, the landscape. The feds have not acted, so the states are acting. And we've seen really a flurry, a surge, I would say, if we can borrow a word, of state activity in the past year. State activity on lawmaking on immigration has been building for 5 years now, since the feds failed to pass comprehensive immigration reform in 2006 and 2007. But this year really was the high water mark. State after state introduced legislation. 10 states passed major new bills, either mandating the E-Verify, federal E-Verify employer verification system for some or all employers in the state, or the other tool at their disposal, copying Arizona's 1070, SB 1070, with a tough policing law. So we have 4 new Arizona-type policing laws. 4 states went down that road, that there was so much controversy over SB 1070. Now 4 more states have done it. In total, 17 states now, we're getting up into the one-third range, mandate E-Verify for some or all employers. 7 states mandate E-Verify for all private employers, except for maybe the smallest. So, what was unthinkable just 3 or 4 years ago is now the norm in many states. E-Verify was unthinkable 3 or 4 years ago. SB 1070 was unthinkable a year ago. Now they are common across the country. And what's complex about this is 5 years ago, I think the conventional wisdom was this is unconstitutional. Well, that is increasingly in question. These states are getting very mixed signals from Washington. The Supreme Court, just this year, I'm sure you've all following it, ruled that state e-verify laws are constitutional, so states can mandate e-verify. On the other hand, the Supreme Court sent a little bit of a mixed signal because they didn't say any other kind of laws, the policing laws or birthright citizenship laws or other immigration laws are constitutional. So the Supreme Court's given a kind of a, green to amber light or amber to green light. Meanwhile, House Republicans, of all people, have introduced a bill giving more of a red light. Not a fully red light, but close to a red light. So mixed states going crazy, surge, surge, surge in the states, mixed signals from Washington, and this in a context of federalism generally, a rising tide. With the do-nothing Congress, the paralysis, the polarization, Congress unable to solve anything, just open any newspaper, states on issue after issue after issue are saying, well, we better try our hand at solving some things. So it's a very volatile, dynamic situation. And we think, some of the most interesting voices in America here to talk about that volatile, dynamic situation. I just want to emphasize one thing about immigration works, and I won't speak for New America, but we're not against enforcement. Business wants to be on the right side of the law. What business wants out of immigration reform is a legal immigration system that works. We want to have access to legal immigrant workers to fill jobs when Americans don't want to do them or don't apply for them. But we think that enforcement alone is not the solution. So we're not against enforcement, but we think that enforcement alone is not going to solve the problem. And again, we think we've brought some of the best voices in America who can explain that. So the first panel, which I will be moderating, and you'll hear more about the second panel when we get to that. The first panel is not just, we haven't just brought experts here to talk to you about this, although they are experts, but we've actually brought players from the states. Our sort of friendly, affectionate term around the office is state immigration champions. These are pragmatic Republicans and business leaders from the states who stood up in the states, stepped out publicly, stepped into the limelight, and either advanced good law or stopped bad law or both. And this takes a lot of courage. So partly what we're trying to do today is celebrate these folks, but we also think they have a message for Washington, which I would sum up as, Republicans have to be part of the solution. The public wants a solution. People in the states are taking the matter, with the feds failing, people are taking the matter into their own hands. But and some courageous people are stepping out to try to guide it in the right direction. But ultimately, this is a message to the feds. The feds this needs to be a model for the feds, and the feds need to follow in the footsteps of these courageous leaders in the states. So we're going to kick matters off this morning for the first panel with Mark Shurtleff, who is the Attorney General of Utah, who will speak for a few minutes to keynote and lead off the first panel. Mark has been the Attorney General of Utah for some years now. Before that, from 1993 to 1997, he was the Assistant Attorney General in Utah. Before that, he was a trial lawyer in California, and he served in the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General Corps, the JAG Corps. So with no further ado, Mark, thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning. I want to thank Tamara and Andres, the Immigration Works in New America Foundation, for sponsoring this today, and it's a pleasure to be with you here. 150 years ago, this country was being torn apart along political, philosophical grounds, and we were involved in that great Civil War. In fact, in July 1861, 150 years ago, the North had lost the first big battle at Bull Run, and things were not doing well for this country. However, there were a group of businessmen just leading up to that time, and in 1861 out on the West Coast in California. Businessmen who, for years, had been pushing to unite this country from coast to coast with the Transcontinental Railroad. Federal government, Abraham Lincoln and others had been involved, had some interest, but could not do anything because of the conflict that they were involved in. But beyond the Civil War and resolving that great divide, the #1 priority in this country as far as advancement of this country and development of this country was completing that transcontinental railroad. So it fell to businessmen to get going and get started. One group from California heading east, and another from Nebraska heading west. They tried to put out advertisements in the early 1860s in California for workers to come. They hired a couple of thousand men, and within a week they had quit because the work was too hard. And so they ended up having to rely on immigrants to do the work. And ultimately, by 1869, when those two railroads were approaching each other in Utah, my state, literally thousands of immigrants had been injured and given their sweat, their blood, their lives in order to unite this country. The Chinese, who were despised, who were discriminated against, who had no legal rights, who were brought here because corporate America said, we need this work to get done. And for $30 a month, they went out and did one of the most amazing technological feats in the history of the world, literally with their picks and their shovels and wheelbarrows. An amazing, incredible accomplishment that on May 10th in 1869 came together in Utah and drove that last golden spike. So it wasn't the federal government. There were states and individuals, and primarily the business community, who said, we need, for the prosperity of this country, and particularly as soon as the war ended and they really began at earnest trying to complete that railroad by 1869, it fell to those folks to make it happen, on primarily the backs of migrant workers who, in the Union Pacific, Irishmen and Central Pacific Chinamen, who were, again, despised and discriminated against, and yet made this country come together. On May 10th, they drove that golden spike, and they let Chinese workers and Irish workers lay the last yards of track as part of that ceremony. And the spike on itself said, may God continue to unite this country as this railroad unites the two great oceans. So in Utah, when we saw this great rush towards trying to do something in the states because of federal inaction, bottom line, everybody agreed, because of federal inaction, primarily congressional inaction, a failure to take responsibility over the immigration issue, states who were experiencing in our states at the local level the costs and expenses and problems associated with undocumented aliens and illegal immigration, decided that we had to do something, we had to act. And gratefully, at one point, business decided, as usually stepping forward, many people, of those who you represent, stepped up and decided we're going to have to do something about this. Well, the first, of course, approach, the first big headline approach, was what Arizona was doing, clearly understanding that on the border, suffering a lot of problems, some of the violence coming north of the border, they decided they needed to act in a very forceful way, and that enforcement was the way to go. As soon as that passed, of course, in Utah, just north of Arizona, we had this same effort, run by Republicans from my own party, who said we've got to, this tough, get tough, the only way to solve this is through enforcement. As a law enforcement official, I'm all about the rule of law. I'm about enforcing the law. And clearly, enforcement is a component of the issue related to illegal immigration. But we were concerned, first of all, that it wouldn't work. My own analysis, that of other law enforcement officials, was that an enforcement-only approach simply drives people underground. It is not going to stop the issue. You have to recognize that the immigration problems is primarily, if not exclusively, an economic issue, and that we have to separate the immigration citizenship line from the work line, and that enforcement is not going to do anything but hurt local economies and not solve the problem in the end. But we were headed that way. We're one of the reddest of red states, if not the reddest of red states. We saw what happened there in Arizona and how popular politically it was for what Governor Brewer did and others. And so we were headed that way. In Utah, for a long time, we kind of prided ourselves in trying to take a pragmatic, reasonable, responsible approach to immigration. One of the few states that has in-state tuition for the children of undocumented aliens. We have driver's privilege cards in Utah because we know that while they're there, they're going to be driving, and we prefer to have them licensed and insured, where we can find them if we need to, if there's an accident or problem. We'd gone this way, and so we were very concerned that an enforcement-only approach and then the effort to repeal those other advances was going to turn us in a way that we didn't think was going to be positive for the state of Utah. But how do you change that? How do you take that whole headlong rush, everybody behind this concept of we have to do this, and it's a political issue, and we have legislators who have to go to convention, face angry delegates, perhaps, and motivated delegates. How do you get them to do something different, comprehensive, workable? And so we came together with the business community, who have been long voices for a rational, realistic approach to the problem, saying that in this country we've always needed migrant workers, we need them today, even during times of recession, even during times of high unemployment rate. There are jobs that we simply need to have filled by migrant workers that we can't fill otherwise. They're important to our economy. How do we resolve the problem? And how do we do it in Utah? So coming together with business community, with faith-based communities, with law enforcement who are concerned about not doing the job of the federal government, but enforcing the law and protecting people from the truly criminal aliens, those illegal aliens who simply came to our states in order to commit crimes. We wanted to focus on those guys. And so we pulled together and said, whatever we do, we need to provide two recommendations to our legislature, not draft bills, but a set of principles, a statement of, if we go forward with immigration reform, let's do it on a comprehensive basis based on principles. Principles of, sure, rule of law and enforcement, but families and the economy, companies and businesses. And so we came up, this community, with a thing called the Utah Compact, a very simple statement of principles based on the title from the Mayflower Compact, which is a very set of principles before these folks came and settled in Massachusetts, the Pilgrims, to organize what they were going to do, how they were going to move forward, with people of different faiths and different beliefs. They weren't all Pilgrims, they weren't all Puritans. There were carpenters and non-religious people on the boat. They said, we got to find a way to come to work together. And that's what we did in Utah, and provide some support to courageous legislators to go forward and do what was right and what would work, and not just what was politically expedient or what based on misinformation that was out there. And they did that. And at the end of our panel, you're going to hear a wrap-up from Senator Kurt Bramble, who took the lead, a very conservative Republican from probably the most red county in the state of Utah, and therefore one of the reddest counties in the country, stepped up and known as a conservative leader and said, we've got to do something that's comprehensive and that's workable and that's pragmatic approach. We're going to talk about that a little bit more today. And what was so wonderful was that in a matter of 6 months, with this headlong rush toward, we have to do what Arizona did, we have to be strong enforcers, and that's all we're going to do, to an approach where we protected both in-state driver privilege cards as well as in-state tuition, and came up with comprehensive reform that dealt with the issues of work and guest worker permits, as well as an enforcement bill. We are now very delighted to see that some states, and Indiana and others who are following suit, others who are taking unique leads in their own states, hopefully to turn the tide of this enforcement-only, unworkable solution, to team up with faith-based communities, and primarily our business communities in this country that have made this country the greatest on earth, to continue to have your voices heard. Take courage. There is support there for what you've been doing for many years, and we're delighted to be here today to talk more about that in depth. Thank you.
Great. Well, while Mark gets his coffee, so now we will proceed to the first panel. And I just want to remind you all, should have mentioned in my opening remarks, folks will be talking about the particulars of their state, but for an overview of what's gone on in all the states this year, the report that you picked up at the front table. So let me go down the line here and introduce our other fantastic guests. Mark, you know, to Mark's right is the other Mark. Mark Gersel, who is the Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer of Cummins, Inc., a major diesel engine and other kinds of mechanical things I won't even go into, manufacturer, global company based in the Midwest. As he explained to me today, who hails from Louisville. If it was a test, could I pronounce it? Previously, he served as Cummins Vice President of Corporate Quality and Chief Risk Officer. Before that, he was an attorney for IBM. to his right, and I guess we are going rightward toward the reddest county in the country, to his right is Michelle Bolton, who is Vice President of Public Affairs and Economic Development at the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. Previously, she served as the Arizona State Director for NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. And far over there in the right red zone is Senator Kurt Bramble, who is a Utah State Senator, who amongst his other distinctions and accomplishments is a hot air balloon pilot, and also happens to be chair of the Senate Revenue and Taxation Committee and chair of the Legislative Information Technology Steering Committee. He's also an accountant and founder of Bramble and Company CPAs. So Mark Gersel, let's start with you. Talk to us about what happened in Indiana and what role Cummins played. And if I can just set the stage for what I think happened, and you tell me if I'm wrong, early in the session, lawmakers introduced very tough legislation that combined an Arizona SB 1070-like bill with very tough employer sanctions. It even passed in the Senate, but then something happened on the way to the governor's desk. Tell us what happened, and tell us what role Cummins played.
Okay, let me give it just a little background on Cummins,
Please.
just for a second. Cummins, probably a lot of people probably, it's not a household name, but we're about a $16 billion company headquartered in Columbus, Indiana, which is a very small town between Indianapolis and Louisville. We're multinational. More than 50, probably about 60% of our sales are in countries other than the United States. And just as another point of fact, we have thousands of employees in our counties, and about 30% of all of our professional employees were born in a country that is not the United States. So we have hundreds of Chinese families, hundreds of Indian families, hundreds of Latino families. Even before the legislature session began, we were very outspoken with our legislators that any kind of Arizona-style immigration would be very potentially harmful to Cummins. And so we were out front early on. We were out front in editorials and so on. And basically, our stance was pretty simple. For us, it was strictly business. We have to be able to attract and retain the best employees wherever country they're born to the middle of the country in a place called Columbus, Indiana, which is our corporate headquarters and our technical headquarters. And we knew for a fact that if Indiana began passing unwelcoming kind of legislation, our ability to attract and retain employees was really going to be a problem. We have, as you would expect any large company, we have affinity groups, which we talk to. So we have a Latino affinity group, we have a Chinese affinity group. So we talked to them about different laws that were potentially being considered in Indiana. And suffice it to say, they were very concerned, whether they were Chinese or Indian or Latino, about any kind of Arizona-style legislation. So, as you said, it passed very quickly in the Senate in about like a heartbeat. It was passed. Business became very involved. We were involved before the fact, but ourselves and Lilly, which is a large multinational company as well, and we lobbied hard with the legislature and with the governor. And what happened in the House, thankfully, was toward the very end of the session, Indiana decided to remove all of the various parts of the legislation that we thought would be a huge problem for us as a business. And in fact, it got so good with the legislature that toward the end of the legislative session, the legislature actually used our Latino affinity group to talk about various parts of the bill that were remaining. So for example, they would say, we want to have these 5. Is that an issue from a Latino standpoint? So Indiana, in the end, listened very carefully to business. They listened to the Chamber of Commerce. They listened to the convention group, and in my view, did the right thing.
And in one sentence, what actually passed? What did it all boil down to after this good effort?
They passed E-Verify, which was...
But not for all employers, for public contractors,
yeah,
correct?
and so it was very watered down. We're very fearful that the legislature in the next session will take it up again. And if they do, Cummins will be right there fighting it, just like we fought it this time. I will say the other large employers in Indiana were right with us. This was an employer an employer-led kind of, we can't take it, and if you want companies to exist in Indiana, you can't pass this kind of legislation.
So we will come back to you for more about that. Michelle, tell us about what happened this year in Arizona. As we all know, Arizona has been in the vanguard of pushing enforcement only since 2004. You know, first it was a ballot initiative depriving immigrants of state benefits. Then it was the first employer sanctions law in the land. Then it was 1070. It's been Arizona out front, or whatever part of the direction we're going, all the way, leading us backwards. This year, the package didn't pass. What happened, and what role did business play?
Well, thank you, Tamar. As everyone knows, we have been sort of the leader in the country for immigration policy and have been for the past decade. And the business community has worked with the legislature over that time. I think after 1070 passed, and just so we're clear, the business community went neutral on the provisions once the business provisions were worked out in 1070. We obviously didn't have the expertise on the law enforcement provisions. There was a division within the law enforcement community about what was right, what wasn't right. So we said, look, we'll negotiate on those provisions and we'll move on. No one could have ever imagined that one of our very own members of Congress, Raul Grijalva, would call for a boycott on our business community, punish our business community, punish the workers in Arizona, which led then to, of course, La Raza and other groups to call for boycotts on Arizona. So we were obviously suffering from immigration fatigue. Obviously, our conventions were being canceled, which was an impact to our tourism industry. Some analysis obviously was done, and we were trying to work and move forward to try to repair the image of Arizona. Whether criticized right or wrong, we were trying to work towards repairing that image. In the interim, in that fall of 2010, we were under the impression as a business community that we were sort of going to take a break. Lawmakers were saying, you know what, we're going to let the chips fall where they may regarding the two outstanding lawsuits. You might recall our 2007 legislation, LAWA, Legal Arizona Workers Act, was still being challenged, going through the court process, and then, of course, 1070. Fast forward to the legislative session, all of a sudden we started to see, of course, a lot of pieces of legislation. Some pieces of legislation, you know, absolutely Arizona should be involved in, whether it's border security or identity theft or human smuggling, but we went well beyond that. 5 pieces of legislation in particular that were introduced. 2, of course, that got probably the biggest light shined on it, and that was, of course, the birth certificate, the Arizona birth certificate, and its companion bill, which would allow Arizona to work in a compact with other states. To, of course, you know, identify or verify that birth certificate. And then there were 3 other measures. One, basically countering EMTALA with the Fed's mandate on hospitals as far as treatment goes and stabilization. One on education and withholding monies. And then finally, an omnibus bill that basically was taking LAWA, the Legal Arizona Workers Act, and 1070 a little bit further. And again, you know, the business community had immigration fatigue at that point. And you know, while it's a very scary proposition to go and stand out there and say, hey, look, we don't want to do this. We think it's wrong. We think it's continuing to hurt our image. We think that there are better ways to approach this. We think the debate should be on the federal level, not on the state level. Why are we working towards trying to entice even more lawsuits? We already have a bunch of lawsuits out there. And one by one, we started going to companies, small, medium, and large, and asking them to stand up and actually do something about it. We had small businesses come down to the Capitol and testify before Senate Judiciary Committee, Senate Appropriations Committee. In fact, we were very close to killing the bills in Senate Judiciary, so much so that they moved the series of bills over to Senate Appropriations because they had a better shot of getting the bills through. But we just worked very hard and stood up, and lawmakers took notice and appreciated what the business community did. And again, it wasn't just the chambers, it wasn't just the Greater Phoenix leadership and Southern Arizona leadership and the Flagstaff 40. I mean, these were real businesses, small, medium, and large, standing up and saying, enough already. Let another state take the lead, and let's take that debate and focus our energy on the federal level.
Well, not just standing up, but signing 60 CEOs, signing a letter, correct?
Yes.
I mean, what did that letter say, and what were the range of signatories?
Well, and if I may just read just a very quick paragraph. Pretty much the focus was, again, you know, we believe that immigration is in fact a problem, but it is a federal responsibility, particularly the issues that they were trying to address in those five pieces of legislation. And just to sum it up, They said, Arizona lawmakers and citizens are right to be concerned about illegal immigration, but we must acknowledge that when Arizona goes it alone, and in many cases we were going it alone, unintended consequences inevitably occur. Last year, boycotts were called against our state's business community, adversely impacting our already struggling economy and costing us jobs. Arizona-based businesses saw contracts canceled, were turned away from bidding, sales outside of the state declined. Even a business which merely had Arizona in its name felt the effects of the boycotts, compelling them to launch an educational campaign about their company's roots in Brooklyn. It is an undeniable fact that each of our companies and our employees were impacted by the boycotts and the coincident negative image. And they go on further to say that, you know what, we got to repair our image, we got to focus our energies on the federal level, and we've got to compel our federal folks to do something about it, because as long as we continue down the path of inaction on the federal level, we're going to continue to see the patchwork quilt of laws happen, and it's not good for businesses, especially when they're multi-jurisdictional.
Great, thank you. Senator Bramble. So if you can pick up where Attorney General Mark Churtliff left off, so you're a Republican lawmaker from the reddest of red counties in America, and along comes this proposal that you get behind a proposal that has enforcement, but also gives work permits, not legalize, excuse me, but gives work permits to the unauthorized worker in your state. I mean, if somebody from Mars had told me this had happened, I would have said, you know, you're making it up. That's science fiction. Tell us, how did this come about, and what was actually in the legislation?
Well, you have to, I appreciate the question and appreciate you sponsoring this event. You have to start with the premise that the states are faced with and what the predicates are at the state level. The following describes in pretty accurate terms what happens at the state level. The federal government says to Utah or to Arizona or to any other state, you can't do anything about illegal immigration, and if you do, we're going to sue you under federal preemption, federal supremacy, as evidenced by the injunction against enforcement in Utah and in Arizona. But the federal government says, states, you can't do anything, and we, the federal government, refuse to do anything. And that's where we begin the discussion. But they don't stop there. They say, Utah, you must pay for health care through the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, called EMTALA. Anyone that presents themselves must be treated. Now, I serve on the board of the largest health care provider in the state of Utah. Our emergency rooms have become free medical clinics to undocumented populations. The federal government doesn't stop there on health care. They say under a 1982 Texas case, you must educate children. You can't ask their immigration status. They don't stop there. They say you must pay for corrections, public safety, and all of the other costs of the illegal alien population within your state. This is by far the largest unfunded mandate on the states that we've seen in our states, in our nation's history. But then the federal government doesn't even stop there. They say, look, we won't stop illegal aliens from coming into your state. We don't have secure borders. They say we won't allow states to deport illegal aliens from within your state, and we won't allow them to work in your state so they can begin paying their own way. That really is the landscape that we're faced with. Now in Utah, we have the lowest per pupil spending of any state in the nation in terms of public education. Our public education system is challenged by this situation. We have the largest families, the largest household size in the nation, the youngest demographic in the nation, but public education, we're dedicating a substantial, disproportionate amount of resources to English language learners, and it's a real challenge. And so we looked at it and we said, look, enforcement is a critical component, but there are other, if you can't deport individuals, and that's one of the predicates, that individuals are within your state and the states don't have the authority to deport. Enforcement only, if you talk to the federal government, if you talk to ICE, John Morton, I see Ann Morris here from NCSL. I've served on the National Conference of State Legislators Executive Committee and the Executive Committee Task Force on Immigration, and we were briefed in May of this year by the head of ICE that the federal government would never get to more than 4% of the illegal alien population in the country, leaving 96% of that illegal alien population to enjoy de facto amnesty, paid for by the states. Now keep in mind, the federal government enjoys a substantial revenue stream from the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, Social Security deposits made on behalf of illegal aliens in the workforce that will never receive any benefit. And they shouldn't receive any benefit, but nonetheless, the federal government is receiving a substantial positive cash flow at the same time the states are required to expend an extraordinary amount of resources to deal with this population. That, tomorrow, was the starting place for our discussions. You have to have enforcement. The bill that we passed a package of 4 bills that includes enforcement. It includes E-Verify with a 3 strikes proposition. The first violation for an employer without regard to the number of employees is a $100 penalty, and we may be modifying that now based on a Supreme Court decision. The second violation would be a $500 penalty. The third violation could result in the revocation for 1 year of the business license. The bill that we passed begins with the premise that an individual has violated the law. Now, under federal law, violating our nation's immigration or our nation's borders, trespassing, will result in a very stiff penalty of not less than $50 nor more than $250. That is the penalty for trespassing into the United States today. So in Utah, we start out with the premise that individuals who have violated our nation's borders and have trespassed, if they're not a visa overstay, if their first footstep on American soil was as an illegal alien, it would be a $2,500 penalty. We would require them to go through a fingerprint and facial recognition biometric background check. They would be required to provide the identification numbers that they've been using in the workplace. They'd be required to submit to a medical examination, and if they had a medical condition that would make them inadmissible under USC 1182, that's that section that says if you have a medical condition, that contagious disease or whatever, you couldn't be admitted. They'd have to go through the screening process. If there's any evidence of identity theft or if they've committed any other crimes, that would provide law enforcement with the tools to take action. It would require them to pay all applicable taxes. They would have no right to any welfare benefits. They would have no right to file for unemployment benefits or to claim workplace discrimination. In other words, if an illegal alien had a job and a citizen had a job and the illegal alien was terminated, they wouldn't have a right to bring a wrongful termination action. We looked at it and said, if we can't deport individuals from our state, and if we can't stop them from coming into our state, then because of the costs associated with that, there has to be a rational approach to dealing with it. That really is the basis of what we tried to do with this package of 4 bills. And I'd like to read the Utah Speaker of the House.
We'll come to that, okay? We'll come to that. I know that's on the agenda. But the bottom line answer there is you as the reddest of red county, representing the reddest of red counties, did this out of self-interest. So you had to deal with the unauthorized immigrant population out of self-interest.
The bottom line is, as a CPA, as a businessman, I looked at it and said there has got to be a solution to this problem, teamed up with our Attorney General and with enough Republicans and Democrats, with the business community, with community leaders. We believed that in the absence of federal action, the federal government has been an abject, pathetic, a dismal failure in addressing this problem, but they enjoy that cash flow. If you can't deport illegal aliens, if they're going to be within your state, then we had to find a solution at the state level.
Got it. Okay, so now let's dig a little deeper, and I'm going to come back to you business folks for a minute. I mean, what a risk, right? You have a huge brand name, the Cummins brand name, global brand name you're putting at risk. As you said, scary was the word that I wrote down in block letters. I mean, traditionally business has tried to make its views known behind the scenes. Business talks to lawmakers. They negotiate deals. Standing up in front, signing letters to legislators, signing a big public statement as Cummins and Eli Lilly did. I mean, that's a huge step. And what made it come to the point where you thought you had to take that step, and what did you think were the benefits? Did it work out for you taking the big step? So when don't you start?
Yeah, well, it definitely worked out. I mean, we tried our best. Cummins is not a real visible lobbyist. As a matter of fact, I had to do the testifying in the State House, and I am completely a rookie. We spent a lot of time with legislators before the fact, urging them not to introduce the bills. We had to get ourselves very deeply involved because it was moving so quickly. The Senate took it up first. They passed it before anyone even had a chance to think for a second. And so, yeah, we did go out. But for us, it was, for Cummins, it was fundamentally challenging our ability to exist in Indiana. It was very serious. It's extremely hard to recruit people from all over the world or in the United States to the Midwest to begin with. Indiana traditionally has been totally welcome. we didn't have the sort of legislation that was directed at one group or another, so we never had to deal with that. We had to deal with bringing people from China or India or Mexico or Brazil or the East Coast or the West Coast to Indiana. And we knew that if these kind of laws became like an Arizona-style law happened in Indiana, we simply wouldn't be able to recruit and retain the kind of engineering workforce that we needed. So for us, it was threatening our existence as a business because we're so multinational. I said, you know, we're 30% of our people now were born in another state. I mean, sorry, another country. 5 years from now, that'll be 50% or 60%. The fact is that Cummins 5 years from now will be 30% United States and 70% overseas from a sales standpoint. So for us, it was just quite serious. And we don't spend any time in the halls of any state house unless it has to do with these kinds of issues, like, you know, tax and regulatory kind of things. We actually don't get involved at all from a state standpoint. So here it was threatening. We also, by the way, do business in multi-jurisdictions in other states. So we were also active in other states.
But you're saying the same thing in a way that Senator Bramble just said. You said challenging our ability to exist. And you said basically challenging our ability to do our job.
But Tamar, there's another problem. Enforcement only, states can do a very good job at apprehending and detaining individuals, but we don't have the ability to deport. And if you apprehend and detain and then the individuals are simply released, you call that catch and release, and at the end of the day, it doesn't address the root of the problem.
Michelle, talk about Arizona businesses coming out and taking this scary step. You know, what drove it?
Well, certainly, I think that I would echo Mark's comments. You know, they needed to stand up and do something if they were going to continue to exist, if they were going to continue to be able to attract talent to Arizona. I mean, and obviously we have a big push to attract business to the state of Arizona and diversify our economy. So they saw that as a challenge. They saw that there was an attack on our image, and we needed to do something to repair it. And I will tell you, you know, the fear factor always is the amount of backlash, because I will tell you when we were a part of the discussions when LAWA was happening in 2007, a lot of us received death threats and had to report them to the authorities. So you always have that in the back of your mind of, oh my gosh, you know, someone's going to come and actually show up at your doorstep maybe. So, you know, you always have that threat of, well, I'm not going to be a patron of your member businesses. And we did get that feedback from some, but most of the businesses that signed that letter came back to us and said that it actually worked in the positive. And I'll give you an example. One of our board members, Community Tire, Howard Fleischman, he was really active in the media. And I mean, he did a phenomenal job as someone that is not, you know, a professional at going to the legislature or speaking with the media. And he received, you know, some complaints, but actually his business picked up because people said, thank you for standing up and actually say something, because you said something that I was fearful to do myself and receive the backlash. And actually I have a stack of letters too from other organizations and the consulate from Mexico, you know, because we're obviously trying to do business. That's one of our biggest trading partners with Arizona is Mexico. You know, saying thank you for standing up and actually doing something about it.
Well, that was exactly where I was going to go next with the next question. So, Mark, let's give this to you, too. Public reaction, approval, backlash. I mean, you're getting letters, you know.
Called names.
You know, again, in the reddest of red states, what is the public reaction?
Well, probably the greatest victim of this whole immigration debate is the truth, clearly. And many of the reasons for immigration enforcement only in Arizona was just misinformation the public is being given by a very motivated, albeit small group, but growing because of misinformation about the crime rate among illegal aliens, about their drain on society and what they're actually providing and what these people do and so forth. And so the big misnomer, the big false information that came out of businesses being involved in this is, oh, it's the greedy businesses just wanting to make money off of cheap labor. And you're going to hear that, and you're hearing it loud and clear. But so the key is and so there's that fear. I don't want, you know, we want to get the truth out. You have to have panels like this. You have to step up and tell the truth about who we're hiring and what we're doing. And that's why I brought in the historical context to begin this discussion, because so many times in the history of this country, when federal and state governments or local governments have been unable or unwilling to act, it has been corporate leaders. It has been people like Leland Stanford, who was a grocer in California, who saw that California becoming a state and had this great divide between, and the only way to get commerce around was go clear down around South America to come up, that the way for this country to grow and to succeed and be great was if businesses got involved, made the risk, hired unskilled labor. By the way, the term coolie for the Chinese came out of India. It's a Hindu word the British used to mean unskilled labor. And it was those people who wanted to come here and businesses willing to pay them. They were highly criticized for bringing what many Americans in California felt were less desirable people, but willing to come here to work hard to succeed. And the impact on this country was immense. That is the same today, where we're ripped apart in this country along political divide, where we seem unable to get together and to accomplish something. The business communities, faith-based leaders, law enforcement need to give the support to courageous lawmakers who are concerned. And it comes back to the lawmaker, because they're hearing, there's this very vocal, very active crowd out there. And say what you will about elected officials, about politicians. I know a lot of them, worked with a lot of them for my 13 years in public office. The vast majority, just good people who want to do their jobs and they want to serve. But they have to be reelected to serve. And if they're looking like they're not going to be reelected, then they want to go with what they think is where the public is headed. And so it's important for corporations, in this case we're talking a lot about businesses, but others, to step up, provide that encouragement, that cover, to say not only, let's base this on fact and reason and on impact, ultimately impact what's positive, but then also to provide that support for those lawmakers once they're going to be attacked and targeted. And Senator Bramble has one big giant target on him right now, as other elected officials are in our states, by that one group. And they need that support.
Talk to us, Kurt, let me ask you, drive it home with a question. So the famous Utah Republican convention that has, got rid of Chris Cannon and got rid of Senator Bennett, and a feisty Republican grassroots convention that makes its will known every now and again. Well, I was really appalled when I heard the news that they had voted for a repeal of the package. Tell us why that's not as significant as I
Put it in
thought
perspective.
it was.
In Utah, the state convention system has 3,500 delegates. At our state convention, a little less than 2,200 showed up to get their credentials. At the time the vote was taken on a resolution to repeal the House Bill 116, there were about 1,500 individuals that were still at the convention, and the vote, it was a 94 vote difference.
94 votes, that's not very much.
94 votes was not a significant difference, although the resolution did pass. It was a non-binding resolution requesting admonishing the legislature to repeal House Bill 116. The interesting disconnect with that, many of us send out surveys to our constituents, Republican or to the general public. And consistently on the issue of immigration, surveys would come back. These are surveys we send out and ask citizens to respond and whatever. On the same response, you would have about 70% of the citizens wanted enforcement, and about 70%, about the same percentage, wanted, in the absence of federal action, were asking the state to do something about, call it a guest worker program, or some way to address those individuals that were already resident in the state, that were becoming ingrained in and intertwined in the communities, where deportation, the challenge with the debate about deportation, and the general public gets it, that if you're going to go down the road of deportation, you have to impose on every citizen the same standard you would try to impose on the illegal alien in terms of proving the authority to be in the United States, and that intrusion on civil rights would be untenable. So about 70% of the survey respondents, and this is general public, wanted both enforcement and a guest worker survey at the convention. Now, the opponents of 116 had been working diligently for several months to rally their troops. The folks that supported 116 mounted a campaign going into convention the last couple of weeks before the convention, and even with all of the anger, the passion, the motivation of the opponents, and it's far easier in politics to do something when you're angry, you're motivated. It still was a very close vote. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the 2012 convention and the 2012 delegate selection process.
Well, and you still have the governor on your side, and you still have the leadership in both chambers, Republicans who are still standing by the bill, right? And you still have the church. I mean, tell us about that. There's 94 people.
In Utah politics, very much like I'm a Chicago native, Boston, Chicago, the Catholic Church has a significant influence on politics. In Utah, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a significant impact. The Mormon Church supported the compact and very clearly supported the package of bills, including House Bill 116. It is an interesting dynamic because this is splitting the Republican Party. But the tweet of the day, compliments of the Salt Lake Tribune, Matt, from Representative Stephen Sandstrom, said that immigration should not be the issue that divides the GOP. And last week, Representative Sandstrom called me and said, look, Kurt, we have this issue with E-Verify. We now have a court decision. Would you be willing to engage in an amendment of 116 to change the E-Verify to comply with the court decision on going after licensing rather than financial penalties? And there are some other things that we can do to strengthen 116. In the bill itself, we anticipated that many of the provisions would actually be adopted by administrative rule. For example, a background check, we put that there should be this fingerprint background check, but we didn't direct by statute exactly how the state would do that or what information they would obtain, because we already have background checks and you already have an administrative rule that says to the state this is how you do it. Well, instead of leaving that to administrative rule, Representative Sandstrom asked if I would be willing to sit down with he and other folks on the opposition to come to a compromise position that would keep 116 intact, strengthen it, clarify it, and strengthen some of the enforcement under E-Verify. And the bottom line is we're moving forward with those discussions. Again, the Salt Lake Tribune, it was somewhat surprising to me, but Representative Sandstrom had talked to the Salt Lake Tribune about that very issue, about coming forward and offering to find a compromise.
Well, I never would have thought that what I would come away from this panel would be quoting Stephen Sandstrom, but let's not let immigration be the issue that divides the GOP.
And for the audience, just so you know, Representative Sandstrom was the Utah sponsor of enforcement only, and he's a Senator Russell Pills type.
So I'm going to go down. I'm going to go down the row now.
Yeah. To his credit,
to
Representative Sandstrom's credit, Attorney General Shurtleff supported a bill that Representative Sandstrom and I co-sponsored as one of the 4 bills in the immigration package. So this isn't a divide that is terminal.
Fair, good point. So I'm going to go down the panel for, I think, our last question before we get to open it up to the audience. Talk to me about, so we know that you had a good effect on the laws that you were working on. You guys got your package. Indiana, you beat something back. Arizona beat something back. But talk a little bit about the broader change that you think you're working. You know, you've stood up here, you've made a big stand, you've taken a courageous stand, you accomplished your immediate end, but what about changing the climate more generally? And what about, so not just like not backlash, but how are you actually affirmatively changing the climate? And what about your delegations? So, you know, are the delegations listening? You know, is this message getting through? You know, you won the battle. What about the war? How's what you've done help advance into the wider war?
Well, the first thing is that we want to show is that in a red states, Republican state, that Republican legislators facing tough delegates in a system that is very risky, did the right thing based on what really was workable, rational, reasonable, pragmatic approach to the situation, and they stepped up and they felt like they had the cover and the ability to do that, and that word is spreading. Thanks to Immigration Works and others who are spreading this word. In Indiana, you saw a change because people got up and got involved. That word is spreading. I am working very hard to see that the state by state, other states do the same. They say, well, we can do this too. Ultimately, the goal is, I think, you know, I don't mind the fact, and I will probably be litigating at some point with the federal government over House Bill 116 and supremacy. I believe that we can win that lawsuit, frankly, but the key ultimately is not to have 50 separate state laws, but to get the federal government to do it. And if the message to Congress can be, look what's happened in the states, look where people are going based on the truth, and based on really the majority of what is good for this country and what is the truth about what's going on, that they can take action ultimately as well. Not going to happen. No one thinks it's going to happen before the next election, but ultimately giving them the courage to go forward. And we're seeing a lot of success as we start moving that direction. Our congressional election, I'll let Senator Bramwell talk about how our local legislature feels about Congress, but I've been meeting with them. I've been meeting with the federal government, meaning the Department of Justice. I've met with Morton and others, and Mayorga of USCIS and ICE. Frankly, the federal government, the executive branch, is very interested in what we're doing in Utah. They want to work with us. They want states to be involved in a comprehensive approach, but they're also getting substantial pressure from the Congress, from Congressman Smith and others saying, sue Utah. They're doing something that's a federal responsibility. Amazing coming from somebody who has done nothing to this point about the problem. So, but I do see progress, and I do see, maybe not real quickly. So let's, in the next year and a half or so, let's the states continue to be those laboratories of democracy and set the example for the federal government. I think that we'll see ultimately good comprehensive reform nationally.
We're with you on that.
Okay.
Indiana, so the wider war, either in terms of next steps politically or just in terms of creating political space, opening up political space. Do you feel that you've opened up political space for others? And where's your delegation?
Yeah, I think so. And again, we have large groups of people in various other states too. So it's not just Indiana where we've been active as far as kind of what our views are. The story in Indiana actually turned out quite pleasantly. The Indiana legislature, we worked very closely with them. I talk about backlash. We, of course, had the kind of letters and that kind of thing, but I think we ended up as a state in a really excellent position, so much so that we had a huge expansion, which we did in Indiana. Right after the legislative session was done, we knew we had to add 600 to 800 engineers, either in Indiana or in probably China. And we chose Indiana, and we actually, in our public relations, our public discourse said one of the reasons is because Indiana maintained its reputation as being an unbelievably welcome state to do business. So it turned out pretty well for us. We are, the other unintended kind of good backlash was because we were so deeply involved with our employees and listened carefully to them, they actually liked that a fair amount, that we were talking to them and we had their best interests in mind, our current employees, as well as potential employees to do, because Cummins actually is growing a lot, and we're hiring hundreds and hundreds of people around the world, and so it's a good thing. We are active with our delegations, and they know where we stand on both our desire to have the federal government do what its job is, and not leave it to the 50 states, because if you do, you end up, particularly as a multinational company, doing business in a very strange environment where Tennessee maybe do something different than Minnesota, maybe doing something different than Indiana, and so on. We also have been active in things like the DREAM Act, in support of the DREAM Act as small steps while the nation gets its act together on national immigration reform. So we're hopeful. We're seeing things like Utah, which we watch very closely. In Indiana, as we were going through, we saw how Indiana turned out. Very reasonable people. The Speaker of the House, and the head of the Senate, unbelievably reasonable. We have a terrific governor, so we ended up in exactly the right space. But we'll continue to be active. Other companies will continue to be active, because the fact is, for American companies to be competitive in the globe, this is exactly the wrong thing to do. So.
Arizona, opening up political space, effects of this. I know, we all expect Russell Pierce to try again next time he gets a gavel in his hand. We know that you haven't, ended that threat. But if you think you've made it safe for others to come out of the woodwork and take the tough stand that these 60 guys took in signing the letter, what do you expect?
Well, I think that the business community will maintain their vigilance. I think more and more of the business community will be showing up at the table to express their concern on provisions if it's something that continues to damage the reputation of Arizona. The one thing I have to say is that, you know, whether you agree with Mr. Pierce or not, you know, he's always allowed for the business community to be there at the table, which is good, you know, because then we can get our concerns out there. But I think certainly he might be rethinking maybe some strategy going forward, because obviously there's a portion of his caucus that really don't want to go down another lawsuit route. They want to have reasonable reform. They also want to keep the pressure on Congress to do something about it. So certainly I think he'll take perhaps a little bit different of a tact, but he did write a letter to our president and CEO, Todd Sanders, who, by the way, is Colombian. So he is an immigrant to the United States, you know, basically saying that he'll enjoy having that robust discussion again next legislative session. So stay tuned for more out of Arizona.
Senator Ramble, your delegation, how's your delegation taking it? And what do you,
Well, first of all,
what's the dialogue between the legislature
for those that would
and
like
the
to see
delegation?
an ongoing discussion, contrast between the Utah solution and the Arizona approach, the National Conference of State Legislators annual conference in San Antonio this year, we'll have a panel where Russell Pierce and I will be presenting opposing solutions. Federal delegation, what's happened? The Speaker of the Utah House of Representatives, Becky Lockhart, on July 1st, published an op-ed piece. And I'm going to quote from segments of it because it says it better than I possibly could. Immigration is a hot-button issue and has been for decades. It affects all aspects of our society, from public health to employment to education to crime. On one hand, immigrants built this country into what it is today. On the other hand, we confront a serious problem with the impacts of those here illegally. The issue has now become so hot that Utah's congressional delegation refuses to address it, despite some of them running for office on that very issue. It has become politically dangerous to propose solutions. It is far safer to throw rocks at those who do. Not everyone is happy with what we did, including some members of the legislature, but as a body, we're proud of the work that we've done. But after all of our efforts, after blood, sweat, and yes, tears, where is our federal delegation when we ask for support? They run for cover wherever they can find it, or throw rocks at those trying to make a difference. Our federal delegation...
This is from the Speaker.
This is from the Speaker of the Utah House.
The congressional delegation.
And those, anyone interested can find the entire content of her op-ed in the Provo Daily Herald. She goes on to say, our federal delegation has watched the legislature do the heavy lifting to get immigration reform off the ground while their political will atrophies in the airless echo chambers of Washington. We bleed in the trenches while they wallow in the temporary glory of meaningless, blood-boiling rhetoric. Immigration is just one more in a long list of examples where states bear the brunt of failed federal policy. Meanwhile, Congress benefits politically from an ongoing, untenable situation. They refuse to take the risks necessary in order to tackle the issue and implement solutions. The reality is the predicate that I talked about that drove Utah to a Utah solution is the failed federal policies, the abject, pathetic, dismal failure of the federal government to take this on. When members of Congress say, Utah, you can't do this, then they should step up. And if you believe that it is a constitutional issue for the federal government to address immigration, then we have 5 members in Congress today. We'll have 6 in 2012. Members of the United States House of Representatives, including Chairman Lamar Smith, and the members of the United States Senate, if it's a federal issue, then it is high time that they step up, because the unfunded mandates, the costs to the state, the idea that the federal government will profit from the federal, from FICA, from Social Security, but leave all the substantial costs to the states is reaching a tipping point. That's why you're seeing, I think, Ann, what was it, some 1,300 pieces of legislation last year, 1,400 pieces of legislation introduced in aggregate across the country in all 50 states dealing with this. States are saying, look, we can no longer continue with the status quo on immigration. We've got to do something. And for the federal delegation, these words are pretty strong from a pretty fiery speaker.
Great, fantastic. Let's open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a mic will, I'll recognize you and a mic will come to you. Please identify yourself, and if you want to address your question to someone, go ahead, or ask it generally and we'll figure out who should answer it. Questions, questions, questions. We can't have solved all the problems.
This can't be a shy bunch.
Yeah, exactly. Questions? Angelo can ask a question. Microphone. Tell us who you are.
Angelo Amador with the National Restaurant Association. On the issue of, you mentioned Chairman Smith. He now has a bill. They're talking about marking it up. Any position from any of the panelists on that particular bill?
Well, and you should know that what it does is it will mandate E-Verify for most employers in the country, but it will preempt most state employer sanctions laws. It allows states to punish companies that run afoul of federal E-Verify mandates with licensing provisions. So it's preemption, but I would argue it's enforcement only.
Let me just real quickly address that. I mean, as a law enforcement official, I think the companies ought to obey the law. The problem is if you're going to mandate and punish, you need to be able to provide an ability for them to continue to fill those jobs with legal guest workers. And so they can't just do enforcement only, and they're not going to do a comprehensive approach, but at the same time, they can introduce individual bills that address things like the length of a visa, from a seasonal 6 months to maybe to a 3-year or to a larger period. Take away the 10-year penalty on someone who's been here more than a year undocumented, so they have to wait 10 years. Provide incentives for people to go through the legal process and come back. The bill that Senator Bramwell mentioned that I helped draft and that he sponsored along with Representative Sastrom from the polar opposite was a pilot project with the state of Nuevo León in Mexico, which issues more H-2 visas than anywhere else in the world, and have a 95% return rate to be able to help increase this pipeline to allow these guest workers, once companies are required to do E-Verify under threat of punishment, will still be able to have the jobs filled. They need to do both, I believe. I don't have a problem. States are starting this. There probably ought to be a national, I believe, even though I'm a federalist and I want to make sure states preserve their rights, but in this context there should be a national for businesses so they don't have to have 50 different rules that they have to comply with. So I'm okay with that.
I'd like to jump in on that very quickly. Legislative fiat doesn't work when you're talking about economic demand. We as a nation learned through prohibition. It was so successful when we instituted prohibition that a few years later we repealed it and found that with alcohol it was easier to regulate the manufacture, production, distribution, consumption, etc. And today, while there is maybe a little bit of bootlegging, it's easier to be legal with alcohol. How does that relate to illegal immigration? When there's a demand in the marketplace for workers, the economy, a free market, will find a way to address those economic demands. If you do enforcement only, which is the equivalent of prohibition, you don't address the economic demand. We may just as well legislate to stop the rising tide as to legislate that jobs simply won't be in demand. So if you do enforcement, you've got to have a way to provide the workforce to fill those jobs. And frankly, the migrant worker, throughout the history of our country, it has been migrant workers who have taken up those jobs that we're not raising our children to aspire to.
There's a question in the back over here, I see. Mike is coming to you, and then Pat. Please identify yourself.
My name's Julie Axelrod, and I was wondering about, you were talking about federal costs and state costs. I was wondering if there are state costs to developing the guest worker permit system and the criminal background check. Like, how is that system paid for?
It's paid for from the penalties, $1,000 per applicant if they've overstayed a visa, $2,500 per applicant if their first step on U.S. soil was in violation of our nation's borders. You look at our fiscal analyst has done the analysis, and between those penalties and the requirement of paying all applicable taxes, it would be a self-funding proposition. Actually, it would return money back to the state.
Not only that, but it's really good for enforcement, because we haven't even mentioned the fact that obviously there are what we call criminal aliens, illegal aliens who come to our states and to commit crime. And those are the people that state law enforcement officers are concerned about. We formed a task force, strike force, a few years ago called the Secure Criminal Alien Strike Force. But to fund that strike force and to go statewide is going to take a substantial amount of money. And this is going after the worst of the worst, the felons, the drug dealers, and others. And we're relying to a large part on confidential informants for the rest of the immigrant community to do that. But to fund it, they put into legislation that those funds coming in from these people who are registering will then help to pay for our enforcement efforts against those who are really dangerous and harmful to our communities.
Question up here, Pat Chen. Mike's coming to you. Tell everyone who you are and where you hail from.
Thanks, Tamar. My name is Patrick Shen. I'm an immigration lawyer with Fragman, Delray, Bernstein, and Lowy, and a BYU Cougars fan.
All right, rise and shout.
I have to throw that out there. I'm familiar with the Supreme Court's decision in Chamber versus Whiting. I fully expect states to be encouraged by the decision, absent some federal action on preemption, to want to enact their own laws. One issue not addressed today is what happens. Like my firm, for example, has 35 offices worldwide and about 16 in the United States. And we deal with clients that have multiple, that do business in multiple jurisdictions. What happens when state mandates conflict with one another? One example at one point a few years ago was Colorado and Illinois. One says you have to use E-Verify, the other one says you cannot use E-Verify. And then very recently, Governor Scott in Florida issued an executive order mandating state contractors to use E-Verify on existing workers, which is a direct violation of federal law, unless, of course, if you happen also to be a federal contractor. So where that leaves employers is that by obeying the Florida law or executive order, you necessarily violate federal E-Verify law, which then could get you kicked out of the E-Verify program, which would make you, by definition, not eligible for a state contract or a federal contract. So now, fortunately, Governor Scott withdrew or amended the executive order, so the problem worked itself out. You know, but we're going to see more as states come up with more laws. And how do we deal with that?
I think it's a question for Cummins. Yeah. Practical question.
Call it full employment for immigration lawyers. No, of course it's an issue. It's not just an issue in immigration. It's an issue with any multinational company doing business in various states. And we, as you would expect, we have, Fragman actually is one of our main counsel on immigration, but we watch it very closely, and we hope that states stop the various immigration pieces around the country. But yeah, it's a problem. There's a choice to be made. Suffice it to say that, you know, Cummins, even before E-Verify, we had our own E-Verify. Large companies do. And so we will comply with all the laws. And, you know, we have lots of lawyers. We use lots of lawyers outside, but it's a mess. It's not just a mess, by the way, in immigration.
Final point on that. I appreciate your observation. All that means is enough states there will come a tipping point where there will be enough diverse immigration provisions that it will force the federal government to do the job that they should have been doing all along.
And there's precedence for that. You see it time and again where the federal government has enacted, and states ultimately, when you get the tipping point, then the federal government steps up and says, okay, we got to do this and make it uniform.
The EPA is a great example.
Right.
Okay, fantastic panel. Round of applause, please. Really great. So glad you're here. And now, do not go away. Do not get up. The second panel is coming immediately. So don't leave your seat. Don't leave your seat. Don't leave.